Righto, we will get underway. Welcome to this annual plan deliberation meeting. I'll just open with kia ora kia. E te whānau o te konihera o te aureri. Whaia te maturanga kia marama, kia whaia, taki kia, whai mahi katoa. Tūmaia, tūkaha, aroha atu, aroha mai. Tātou ia, tātou katoa, tihei mauri ora. We have apologies from Deputy Mayor Bryant and Councillor Mackenzie. Someone like to move they be accepted. Move Councillor Hill, second to Councillor Shellcrass. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Do we have any declarations of interest? If not, we will move on to the first report, which is the schedule of fees and charges. And Neil, you're leading this report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So today we're just here to deliberate on the fees and charges. We had all the feedback that we received, and it's in the report, and also attached is the list of all the submissions. Happy to take the report as read and to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, so schedule fees and charges, open for questions. There is a report and resolution contained within it. Any comments, questions, queries or suggestions? Councillor Greening.
Yeah, first a question, I suppose. I don't know how you want to go through this, Tim, in terms of debating these points, but my question really is around the non-consultation of 6.3, which is the cemetery charges, which at a very cursory browse seem to have gone up in some instances over 20%. So I'm just wondering why we're not consulting and why they're going up so much.
Yeah.
Yes, those ones that were consulted as part of the previous consultation. So 6.3 is only a wording change. And in regards to those wording changes, the main sort of impact would be moving the Sunday and public holiday charge, which to just a public holiday charge. So for charges on Sunday, the fees would actually go down. So they go back to a Saturday rate. But in regards to those changes, I'm guessing you're meaning the 2022 to 2023 to 2023 2024. Those were consulted as part of the fees and charges consultation.
Okay, so everything's been consulted.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Apart from the wording change.
Okay. So I'm happy to entertain any other questions from anyone else before we start talking about this, or I can happily start launching into this.
Oh, you're happy to take questions. Brilliant. Are there any other, well, first I'll look for a mover and seconder, and then we can open it up for debate. Is there a mover and seconder for the schedule of fees and charges? Moved, Councillor Murray, seconded Councillor Mailing. So it's been moved and seconded. It's open for debate. And a question from Councillor Greening. I'll come back to you, Councillor Greening. Councillor Mailing.
So just look, I was going through these and looking at, in particular, Collingwood Camping Ground and the boat ramp. These were both Golden Bay matters, and it appeared that they were going up more than 10%, but I also am aware that we're spending a considerable amount of capital in those areas, so we're actually upgrading them as well. So does the increase above 10% reflect the upgrading? Because certainly in Collingwood Camping Ground, we're doing that. And I note the annual boat ramp fee for Pahara was going up about 25%.
Through Mr. Mayor. Yes, those fees are set based on market considerations, and we have both an opportunity to increase the fees, but also we have done developments and investments in the area in general, and those fees reflect that.
Thanks for that. Anything further? If not, Councillor Greening.
Yeah, so I suppose My concern is, I suppose, the inconsistency of the story throughout all of this, which is inflation adjustment, and we talk about 10%, although in other parts of the document we talk about inflationary adjustments being 3.5 for NRDA and other people. My concern also is the fact that, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a 10% average, because there are some charges in here that have gone up over 64%. But my general premise is that the annual inflation rate at the moment is around 6.7% and is actually trending down. In fact, it's trending down, as I understand it, to 2.6% next year and 1.9% in 2025. So if this is going to be an argument or rates increase based on inflation, 10% is way above where we're currently sitting and where we're trending. And it's also taking into account growth, which you're then adding on top of that when we get into the general rates discussion. For me, if you're going to apply a rate, an inflationary argument to all this, and I'm not exactly supportive of that either, I think this council can actually make cost savings and anticipate what will be low inflation in a couple of years, and we should be making those moves now rather than basically passing on the costs to ratepayers while we're unable to actually make those cost savings in this year. And that's a choice this council has made, deferring the cost to the ratepayers. We have the ability, given it's an inflation rate of 6.7%, to actually go, well, that should be the adjustment if we're going to run an inflationary argument across this. Less the growth figure, which has gone up to 2.4, which leaves a substantially lower general inflation rate, around close to 4.1% or thereabouts. That's where we should be tracking our charges. We have time to absorb that, and we have time for ratepayers to be able to afford that. Throughout all these submissions, the question of affordability was raised, and 10% was considered quite extraordinarily unaffordable for a number of people, many of whom are on fixed incomes and have not had that type of increase. You only have to look at the inflation rate or the CPI adjustment rates for wages, i.e. incomes, to see the great disparity between inflation and incomes. Many of our costs were inflation adjusting, but many of the costs are already sunk. Cemetery costs, while there might be some labour involved, I don't think it's gone up 20%. In fact, wages would suggest it's only gone up 1.3%. And the cost of that land was paid decades ago, probably at substantially lower rates, and we've been continuing to increase charges since those periods. So I think the general premise that we should be going for 10% doesn't hold up. And certainly you'll get a lot of blowback from the community who says, well, inflation is not 10%, it's 6.7%, and probably by the time we get out there, we'll be down again in the next quarter. So I can't support the broad array of charges being proposed in this that are above the inflation rate, if that's the story that you're running with. And I certainly can't support that methodology applying to general rates either.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And you did helpfully circulate an email outlining the things you've just spoken on. So thank you for the added information. I'll just note that and when it comes to fees and charges, it actually isn't specifically inflation related. It was a combination of a couple of years of smaller increases in fees and charges. The inflation certainly was an issue, but also a significant part of it was to shift some of the general rate component that supports the fees and charges and collect a greater percentage from the user pays, which I do recall you have been a fan of in the past, and less from the general rate. So it was the combination of those three components that the 10% was made up of, which is alluded to in the report under 4.2.
Yeah, and it's also stated at the start of the document, which outlines that a 10% increase is, I'm just trying to find the words here. Most fees and charges have been increased by 10% to recover costs and account for inflation.
And account for inflation, indeed. So it's a combination of the above. So are there any further comments? It's been moved and seconded. If not, I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
Against?
The resolution is carried. Would you like your vote against noted, Councillor Greening?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Right, we will move on to the next item, which is the annual plan deliberations. And Alan, Neil, you should remain still involved. But Alan, you're now leading this report. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Mayor and councillors. This report for deliberation attempts to present a picture of the views that are expressed in submissions and provides advice on a number of issues raised in those submissions. That's to assist councillors in making decisions about any changes from the proposal we went out for consultation on. There are also a few other changes since the proposal, and those are detailed in section 10 of the report. We have staff have recommended providing some modest funding increases in response to submissions to Kutahinga Motatao and to the Tasman Bays Heritage Trust and to the Nelson Regional Development Agency, and also recommended reversing the budget savings in the rivers maintenance area. Staff have further recommended using a combination of the emissions trading scheme, offsetting some emission trading scheme credits and or use of forestry surpluses to the value of $500,000 to bring the rates revenue increase down to 8.97%. So with that, I'll ask Dwayne maybe to talk about the opportunity around substituting better off funding.
Yeah, through the chair. Last night, I sent you a brief document which talks about an opportunity, I guess, to whether you want to substitute some of your better off funding away from some of the projects that you're already funding towards effectively rates funded projects. The short story is, if you choose to, I guess, maximise that opportunity, something like $395,000 could be repurposed or reallocated from the Rabbit Island and Kingsland Forest Park projects towards 4 projects, and they're listed in my email to you. I guess just a few things to note. In the email last night, I said I'd try to get some better assurance from Crown Infrastructure Partners about the likelihood of those changes being accepted by them. And I've talked to them this morning, and subject to a formal process which we have to go through, our funding infrastructure partner there said that after considering the nature of the projects we want to fund or could fund, they were happy that it's a high likelihood that those changes would be accepted by them. So there's a high likelihood that you'd be able to do it if you wanted to. And in terms of the financial impacts, that's something very close to a 0.2 to a 0.4%, depending on how much you want to change over on the total rates revenue requirement. Although in the there's some draft resolutions that will be added to the list there to account for this if you wanted to go down this route. Staff do also recommend that the projects you take better off funding away from actually remain in place and get funded from reserve financial contributions. So they are the yes, please. There are 3 sets of resolutions. Essentially, here we go. What you could do is those 4 projects there: River Management Plan development of the Tasman Resource Management E-Plan, Tasman Climate Action Plan for next year, and the Catchment Enhancement and Fencing Fund initiatives for next year. That's $395,000. You could apply for better off funding to go towards those. In terms of the things that come up that better off don't fund, $50,000 can come off the equestrian trail on Rabbit Island anyway, because I've talked to the staff and they think it'll only cost $30,000, so there's 50 free automatically. And you could transfer $345,000 out of the other Rabbit Island projects, being the mountain bike park and interpretation panels in Poe, and some of the planting of the Kingsland Forest. into the order of 105, and that frees up the other 345,000 of better off funding you need to repurpose it. Again, those last two in particular are the ones that I suggest that, and there are resolutions to this effect, that you actually fund by reserve financial contributions. They're really worthwhile projects, and I'm pretty sure that some of you at least are familiar with them. And there is a lot of people excited in the community about these things happening. So really, I guess our staff recommendation is, while you might change the funding source, keep the projects in there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dwayne. Just so I'm happy to take questions on that specific, because it was raised relatively late in the piece. Thanks for sending information around last night. It was useful to have it a little in advance. So I'll take questions in relation to this specific component at the moment. Councillor Murray.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Dwayne, just in terms, I think it was in your email, but the use of RSCs to replace the better off funding, does it still remain within the council's debt cap, or is it going to challenge that?
I checked with Matt yesterday, and I think as it stands before these changes, we are within $800,000, I think, of our debt cap. So the roughly $400,000 of changes here would creep you another $400,000 towards that, but you'd still be under. But you know, it's all very, the margin is very small.
Thank you. Further questions in relation particularly to this, before I open up to further questions, comments? Councillor Mailing.
Right, well, I'm supportive of this, but I just want to make sure we're following the rules correctly in terms of RFCs. So Kingston Forest Park, I don't know that we've actually designated that as a reserve just yet, but it is on scope to happen. Would that be correct?
I would actually need to confer with probably others. What I do know is that through the conversations I've had with the reserve team, is that there's a lot of work planned for the Kingston Forest Park, and they are intending to use reserve financial contributions for it. So I didn't get any hint from any conversation that it couldn't be used for that purpose.
I think there's also that issue where there's actually quite a lot of land now that isn't gazetted because of the issues around the tents claim, but to all intents and purposes is going to be managed as a reserve. And I expect that we will treat the use of RFCs in relation to that land the same way we treat other reserve funding, despite the fact they aren't formally gazetted, the final step in the process.
So I'm supportive of this, and the 250 million debt cap is an artificial cap anyway, one that we've imposed upon ourselves. So if in saving the ratepayers' money we get a few $100,000 over it at some stage, I'm actually pretty relaxed about that. I'm more concerned about the cost of rates for our ratepayers. And to me, RFCs are given to council through developments to be spent. And if you don't spend them, they're worth less every year. So I see it as sensible to use it, particularly as the use that we're going to have in these two areas. In Rhode Island, Motorola, Rhode Island, and Kingston.
Thank you, Councillor Mailing. So I just questioned Dwayne. So I'm taking it that should the council agree to the inclusion of these extra savings, that notwithstanding other changes that people may choose to make, that would change the proposed rate rise from 8.97 to 8.57. 0.4.
Apologies. Yes, roughly 0.4 if you use the whole 395,000. So it's that way.
So the figure that's contained in the deliberation report, which is 9.06 to 8.97, again, notwithstanding other changes that councillors may propose or make, that figure would go from 9.06 as the draft, 8.97 as proposed in the deliberations report. Should we include the extra for 395, that would drop to 8.57 thereabouts. Okay, with that clarification, it is open for further discussion, debate or questions. Councillor Greening.
Yeah, so in terms of offsetting against RFCs, I'm comfortable with that. The money's already sunk. This offsets it. I understand the logic of that. don't quite share the enthusiasm that my fellow councillor does on $250 million. It does have to be repaid. It's not free money. And undoubtedly that will come out of rates, which will invariably probably go up to account for the debt. But anyway, because at the moment we're only servicing a very low amount in terms of interest. So, at some point you do have to pay 250 million back. But anyway, and that's the concern of the community. In terms of better off funding, what else is there in the better off funding that we can also pull from? Because 395 seems a pretty small part of the better off funding.
Dwayne.
Through this year, there are several programs in there, totaling 5.64 million or thereabouts from recollection. Part of the challenge actually is not the other projects to pull money from, but to what to apply it to. And that was the challenge, I must admit, I had with trying to work through this. It's actually quite hard to find projects that would meet the better off funding criteria that are largely rates funded. And the reason for that is most of our operating expenditure is looking after what we've currently got, maintenance, contracts, and operations. And this was pretty much stretching what I think we could actually achieve for the forthcoming financial year. In terms of some of the other projects, though, there are things like contributions towards a cadetship between ourselves and Te Tai Ihu Iwi. There's the money we're investing in, the feasibility of an urban development agency or a land assembly fund. There's several small projects dotted around the district. There is roughly an even amount of money spent in each of the wards. For example, Golden Bay has bike track improvements. I'm sorry, we covered this conference. I don't have the list on top of me at the moment. We covered it at a workshop last week. The ones I've looked at here are the ones that council's indicated they were most likely to want to shift funding from.
Okay, thanks, Dwayne.
So it would be useful to go back through these. There's 5.6 million there that we could leverage a few more 100,000 out of, I am sure. If we can do it for these ones, we could do it for a few others. Again, this is important because the rates increase is extraordinarily high and unaffordable for many people. I think we need to be spreading ourselves a little bit more out to make these rates more affordable and maybe slowing some spending down and deferring some stuff further out, especially when you've got inflation forecasts that are going to be lower and will enable us to manoeuvre more. This is my concern generally with the rates increase. Again, I think the premise should be if you're going to apply an inflationary argument to this, then you would deduct growth out of a 6.7% and head towards a rates increase of around 3 or 4%, which I think is affordable for this council to implement across the next 3 years, contemplating LTP, making further savings. And I think that's where we should be going. I don't think we should be enabling this large rates increase to buy another year, which ratepayers will have to pay for before we then try and turn the ship around when you've already created a baseline increase of 8.5, 8.6% already, on top of what was earlier years of 7 and 5 and all the rest of it. So I think we should be working a little bit harder, and I think we should be cutting it a little bit deeper to make us work towards a more sustainable operation and organisation. How would we deal with this if we were instructing you to go away and come back with a few other proposals that we could share off the 5.6 million?
So just by way of process, we did have a workshop the other week in which we provided some direction without making decisions about the sort of things that we expect. And there is this deliberation report is as a result of that conversation. So it's a bit challenging, given I'm not sure you attended that workshop, to then ask now, because that was what we did last week. So
well, this is a deliberation process, not a workshop. This is an opportunity to ask for further cuts, right?
And you absolutely are entitled to ask, but you're not in a position, unless you can get support from the rest of the council, to send council staff away with an instruction to go and find more savings. If that is ultimately the council's decision at the end of today, then clearly that's the position. But the opportunity to do that has been available. That is what the discussions last week involved.
Well, I thought the deliberations are where we do that, not in workshops, which were briefings.
So the deliberations are where we make decisions. Yes. The opportunity to have that discussion around the sort of things we would like the staff to take away, consider and bring back was in the workshop last week. And this is the result of it, which, we may or may not agree with in this meeting, but that is the process.
So again, great that you had the workshop and you provided direction on some, which I must admit I wasn't expecting that from. I thought this is where we do that kind of thing, but nevertheless, if we've done it last night and we've landed some, I can't see why we can't land a few more.
No, you're welcome to suggest changes. You just have to be specific and get a seconder and go through the process.
Right. So I would like, moving a resolution, I suppose, that staff explore further opportunities to save from the 4.6 million of Better Off funding. Do I have a seconder?
It would appear as though your resolution lapses for want of a seconder. So I will move on to other questions or comments. I've got Councillor Shellcrest.
Yeah, thanks, Dwayne. Interesting process, this whole rates, and for me especially, but just I think that's the sort of right sort of stuff we need to be doing, is looking at those things that we can, essentially do without. So I'm definitely liking that number we're getting towards a bit closer to. So I think it's I agree with that Better Off funding option.
Thank you, Councillor Shellcrest, Councillor Hill, and then Councillor Dowler.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. It's fair to say that I think that what we went out with in our draft to the public or to the communities at 9.06 is fair to say it's unpalatable to many and also inevitable. And both those things can be true. And like many councils, when we costed out our 23-24 year, I can't remember actually what the rates increase was set to be at then. When we cost it out now, looking at 19% increase. And many councils came in at around about that around the country. So I want to acknowledge all the work that's been done by staff and here within council for those that have participated in getting it lower. We came back at something like 13, direction still too high, go out at 9.06, still feeling uncomfortable. So I'd certainly want it to be lower still. But I don't want us to be fanciful about this. The reality of it is that that's where we started off at. And it hasn't been an easy process. And none of us sitting here want to go out with 9 or 8 even. But it's pretty inevitable that we're going to have to. I think that we're doing catching up, so we've been caught out a bit by not keeping up. We've got a 0% through COVID that some people say, oh, it makes no difference, but it did make a difference. And we were told at the time, if we made that decision for a 0% increase, it was going to catch us down the line. So that's a part of this too. I think one of the things that isn't expressed so often openly is that we do have regional council and district council responsibilities and obligations. So many people around the country get their bill for their district council or their city council, and they get their regional council rates as well. Well, this combines both of ours, and I think that's understated or understood, not understood so well.
There is a misunderstanding.
That's it. Thank you, Chair. That'll be why you're chairing. And, there's this tension. We all know this, the ever-present tension between paying for and having rate increases to pay for and all that needs to be maintained, let alone new projects. So this is an ever-present tension among all of us in this council. So to think that we sit here quite lightly, just spitting out a 9% increase is just, you know, it's a bit offensive, really. So, and I suppose one of the things in terms of that equation tension, you know, we had a submitter who said this increase is way too high. And I also want you to consider building a flyover at Gladstone Road. And that really sums up the business that we're in here today about how to balance these things up. I do want to be lower than we're down at 8.9 with the better off funding. I support the better off funding shift. I think that's a good idea. I found the workshop really helpful so that those that were able to attend, we could go through each item and say, actually, can you focus it on these? Thank you, Dwayne, for that email coming through, you know, articulating that and making that clear. So I do support that. In terms of the forestry account and ETS, I'd like to see us double that amount. So we've got 500,000 signalled, and I think that would get us nearer to 8%, which I'd be more comfortable with. But I do have a question about, I think we've got 18 or 20 million in the forestry account. And I know that's tagged for Waimea Dam loan funding at some point. So I've just got a question about if affordable, whatever it's called, goes through, waterable. Yeah. If that goes through, say Labor stay in, it goes through and continues on, and the council ratepayers portion of the Waimea Dam and debt goes, what happens with that money if we have tagged it as loan? Well, oh, sorry, you're right there?
It's all right.
Yeah. Should I?
No, Mike, you go.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just clarify a couple of points. With the additional $500,000 to come out of the enterprise activity, primarily forestry, that is recommended in this report, that means that $1 million is coming out of forestry in total, because there's already $500,000, and Councillor Hill's suggesting we take that to circa 1.5 million. In terms of council's income in forestry, we have to be particularly careful, because you only get to cut the trees down once. And we have got in the future, we've got some big gaps in the forestry income. In fact, some years in which we get zero or actually negative income out of forestry. So part of my rationale for recommending caution in this space is because you need to smooth the income out of forestry over the forestry cycle, so that you've got the ability to contribute the current level of support for rates into the future. So there's a little bit, if you spend the money now, you don't have it in the future, and we're going to need it. In terms of affordable water, council has indicated that it may use the forestry surplus to assist the payments on some of the debt in relation to the dam. And I would suggest that a decision on that is delayed until we have clarity around the affordable waters reforms. And that would be a conversation for the LTP. It's also useful to remember the LTP is looking out 10 years, and for infrastructure, effectively out 30 years. That's the time to make careful consideration of the financial prudence of some of the structures you may put into place in the long term. So in short, councillor, I would suggest that we maintain the recommendation in this deliberation as a measured approach to the challenges our community has with cost of living rises. I would note that the government has moved to provide some support, particularly for lower income and fixed income people within the community, with the increase in the cost of living. And therefore, I'm reluctant to recommend taking further money out of the enterprise account at this point in time.
Thank you, Mike. I guess I'm thinking that, you know, what if this is the worst year that we have? And we look back and go, well, actually things, I mean, it has been indicated that inflation's peaked and things are shifting. And I suppose that's my rationale for wanting to do that. And that, yeah, I guess I've said enough. I've probably said a bit too much at some point there, but so I'm interested to hear from anybody else who would support that approach.
Okay, thank you. I have on the list, just for clarity, Councillor Dowler, Councillor Butler, Councillor Dakey, and Councillor Mailing. Councillor Dowler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apologies for not talking last week on Zoom. I had other commitments when I was down south. I just couldn't make it that day, but I put all my trust in you guys to do the workshop. And what I'm working so far, I think you did a pretty good job. Could I just have a clarification, please, probably from someone? Councillor Greening talks about inflation, and good on him for doing that because it is a big thing in the community, but council inflation and general inflation are completely two different things. Can someone just run that past everybody again, just in case they don't realise exactly what it is?
Through the chair, I'll happily do that. The Consumer Price Index, the thing that's often referred to inflation, measures prices of a basket of goods that a typical household would consume. Council has its own local government cost index, which does the same thing, but for the basket of goods that we consume, and they are slightly different. And our cost index doesn't necessarily match inflation. It can be at any point in time a little higher or lower, although it's tended to be on the higher side than inflation as a whole, because the consumables are things that we consume.
Thank you, Councillor Dowler. Have you got a further question or comment?
Yeah, while I was down south, I looked at lots of different things. First thing I saw was the price of fuel. 95 down in Invercargill was $2.40 a litre. At the moment in Motueka, it's cheaper than Nelson at $2.55. So it was 15 cents a litre down there. I can't work that out because all the fuel comes from up Whangarei Way and gets transported down, and yet they can do it 15 cents a litre cheaper. In Winton, which is the little town I was in, it was $2.41. So, you know, like, it's really, really strange that different parts of New Zealand are paying through the nose. You go into Nelson, it's $2.70. I think even here at BP, it's $2.70 a litre. So it's really weird. Paper in the morning I left, Gore, 13.28% rate increase. The people down there, a bit concerned about it, but they knew the council was under the stress, so that's what's happened. Yeah, so, you know, like it's really hard. I think if we can get to where we're talking about today, more than happy to see it at that level. Unhappy that we have to be there, but Councillor Hill said we did a zero rate increase. We thought it might bite us in the backside. It did, or has. So, yeah, we're doing the best we can, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dowler. Councillor Butler.
Thank you. Yeah, my understanding of the Better Off funding was that it was really for specific projects. And I think that staff have done well to actually shift around that money as far as they possibly can, because it was not intended to be actually used to subsidise rates. So I support the resolution that is there for the Better Off funding, because I think that's as far as we can go. And thanks to the staff for the late work on that. I think that rising food prices are a big factor for people, and I don't see that council can actually compensate for that more than a certain amount. So I appreciate that our rates rise at 8.57 is high, but I also understand that food prices and other prices, and as Councillor Dowler says, petrol prices are going up as well. So we are only part of the picture of rising costs, and we can't actually take on the burden of these other cost rises. We've got obligations under our regional function and more obligations now, now that the government legislation is kicking in for protecting and restoring biodiversity, freshwater, all those things, and that is all going to actually be a cost to us. And I think that has to be recognised in our rates rise, because in some spheres we have actually been sitting on our hands for a long, long time. So now we actually have to pay for these things. So for me, as far as the using more money from forestry, I respect the approach to actually look at under the long-term plan to look further, because I feel it may be a bit rash at this point to to use more money, and I appreciate that actually there has been some movement already in using some of that money as a result of our requests. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Dakey.
Okay, so I think I support Councillor Hill and recommendation. I think we can do 500,000 from the forestry enterprise, and I think we can probably do 500,000 from the ETS, understanding what Mike said about the future pain, but of course the community are under extreme pain. So this might be, hopefully, let's hope that this is the highest inflation community is going to suffer, and this is probably the period where we can help them out, and it isn't going to put us in a negative position that we can't deal with in the future if we spend these 200 lots. So I'd just like to start to clarify, if we took 500,000 from forestry and 500,000 from ETS, is that nearly an entire % off rates? Is that correct?
I think Dwayne's just doing the calculation, but it would be close to that. I think it's about $18 million we collect in rates. And of course, that will have an impact on the general rate across the district. I would counsel caution, as I have in the past. I'm concerned that with pulling additional money out of forestry, we'll also potentially breach our net debt cap. And simply because, as you heard earlier from Dwayne, we're within now, assuming you pick up the changes for the Better Off funding, you're within about $200,000 of that net debt cap at $250 million. I am concerned about a breach. While there is no penalty for breaching the cap, and while it won't cause an issue in terms of the caps are higher for our LGFA borrowing, it is something that does need to be reported. And if that was a direction of council, we would have to note in the resolution today that you are likely to breach your net debt cap. And so that is a bit of a challenge. As I noted previously, I do have concerns about the sale of the ETS credits, not in an absolute sense, but in the timing of any sale. So at the moment, within the report and within the resolution, staff have the ability to substitute ETS credit sales for drawdown on forestry surplus. So we can actually do that at a time that is advantageous to council if we need to do that. And we don't end up, shall we say, doing ETS credits at a fire sale price, because as I noted earlier for councillors, they have been as high as $88 a credit. They were, I think last time I looked, they were down to about 55. The Climate Change Commission would indicate they'd prefer them to be up at about $150 a credit. So I think the timing of any sale is quite critical. But the point I wanted to draw to council's attention is additional funding coming out of forestry will likely cause us to breach the net debt cap, and we'll need to reflect that in the resolution today.
Thank you, Councillor Dakey and Mike. Matt McGlinchey, your hand was up briefly, did you want to add to the response?
I was only confirming Mike's basically covered it, that yeah, it would cause problems with the net debt cap.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mailing.
Right. Well, I hear what Mike's saying, and if I look at, I don't just look at forestry. I want to look at enterprise activity as a whole, and what we've done this year, and what our policy says. And our policy says we reinvest 75%, which we are doing, particularly in Te Rakoe, and hopefully we'll leverage some money out of central government for that investment. That will be something for the NRDA to help us with. It might be part of their performance criteria going forward. But I'm somewhere in the middle of where Councillor Hill and Councillor Dakey have been, because I think if I ask for an amendment to Resolution 23 to 700,000, and it's a mixture of ETS and enterprise activity. I just don't want to talk about forestry, because we make money out of our other enterprise activities, whether it's camping ground, commercial activity. We actually made a cash profit out of Te Rakoe, I'm quite pleased to say. And I want to acknowledge that, because in the past we haven't. And it looks good going forward, because there's 2 rock contracts, as I understand it, going forward. So it's much improved from what it was. So I would like to amend Section 23 to 700. I don't think that will make us breach that cap. And it's a self-imposed cap. And I'm happy to move the other amendments as well.
So you're moving the entire resolution, correct? But you're changing 23 to 700,000,
which is a compromise, listening to the staff and listening to my fellow councillors. And that brings, by my reckoning, the rates increase down to about 8.3.
Okay, so it's been moved. So is everyone clear what's been moved? Moved, Councillor Mailing, seconded Councillor Hill. So that is now the motion. So I've got a number of speakers. So 700. I've got Councillor Shellcrest, Councillor Greening, and Councillor Walker.
Yep. Okay. I was obviously going to agree with Chris and the mixture. Obviously, it's just a tug of war, really. But obviously, on the enterprise side of it, I'm really interested in that. Obviously, moving forward, but I think that's you've got an opportunity to, I suppose, to be. I'm not saying you're not doing a great job, but there's opportunities to be better. Be better. It's all about, for me, it's all about money in, money out. It's no different from like my business. If I need money, I've just got to perform better. So, yeah, just really interesting to see if there's any opportunities in that enterprise space moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Shellcrest. Councillor Greening.
Yeah, so where do I start? Mike, I'm just trying to get my head around what appears to be shifting piles of money. We're shifting funds from one side of the ledger to the other side. My understanding was most of this funding was to repay the dam. So I'm taking it from the fact that we're now potentially at risk of breaching our debt cap again. That really all we're doing is shifting piles of money around and just spending more.
Mike. Through you, Mr. Mayor. With the amended resolution as put forward by Councillor Mailing, we would sit on our net debt limit of $250 million because we fund the balance sheet as a whole, so we were unlikely to breach unless some other event caused a breach, and we don't know what that might be.
So this money wouldn't normally go towards debt repayment or dam repayment?
So with your permission, Mr. Mayor, the as happens with all of the council activities, the enterprise activity surplus balance is used to fund our balance sheet as a whole. So when we talk about having $20 million sitting in the enterprise activity surpluses at this point in time, it's actually currently offsetting borrowing we would otherwise make. So if we were to spend $20 million today and I had to go and take the money out of the bank, then I would be borrowing $20 million to do that. So it would push up council's net debt. So in short, we fund our balance sheet as a whole. The surpluses in any activity and the deficits sit there, and they are utilised to reduce the net debt that we're having to borrow at any one point in time.
Yeah. So my impression is we're basically increasing our debt to reduce the rates. That's the net impression I'm getting here. We have an obligation as council to act prudently. I think it's a statutory obligation, 104 or something like that in the Local Government Act. I don't see this being very prudent writing right up to your debt cap. But coming back to an earlier observation, which I just have to disagree with, I think it was an observation by Councillor Hill about we've made lots of effort to where we've landed now. That's not the history I remember from our initial workshop meeting, where I suggested we need to make more meaningful savings at the start, and that there were serious trade-offs that were not put on the table, and that we were just tinkering around the edges. And the comment in that meeting was, well, we'll deal with that when we get to the LTP, i.e. kicking it down the road. So no, I don't think we've put our best foot forward through this annual plan. And I don't think we've made all the effort we could have done because we didn't. And we said that, we acknowledged that in that workshop. So just want to correct the rewriting of history there. Again, I cannot understand, well, I do understand this is how this council's been operating for a number of years, of just increasing debt and trying to make out that that's really just reducing rates. You're just deferring the inevitable. You have not made meaningful cost reductions, and that's what needs to happen. You are tinkering with debt. You're just shifting money around. And I certainly don't support what I consider to be not very prudent financial management if you're going to indicate you're going to breach your debt cap. It doesn't signal prudence to me, especially when we've set it ourselves. And again, the community are concerned about the current level of debt going up, which they will have to fund and repay at some point. It's not free money. So, yeah, I mean, generally, I think this has been a very dissatisfying annual plan process. I don't believe we've done the best job that we could have done. And I believe quite firmly that we should be proposing, which is not in this resolution, so I'll be voting against it, a rates cap that is much more reasonable and affordable and will challenge the organisation to reset some of its expenditure, which is quite substantial, in areas downwards. I don't agree with some of the report in here that we've reduced our staff numbers, reduced our increases, which means we're still increasing from 11 to 6. I mean, we shouldn't be having any increases in staff. If anything, we should be going the other way because we can't afford the current expenditure that this council is incurring. As I've noted before, in the last long-term plan, we jumped from 300 to 400 staff. We went up 100 staff. It's just unsustainable for a community of this size, and especially when a community is shifting its demographics into an older fixed income-based demographic rather than a young income-earning demographic. And you can see that in the stats in terms of average incomes. And as Councillor Dowler has alluded to, prices are going up, food is going up, and we need to be supporting our community to be resilient through that process. And I don't believe this rates proposal has in any way done that. And I don't believe we actually made the real hard decisions to do that, because we acknowledged we were going to, or some of the people around the table wanted to do it around the long-term plan. Personally, I believe we should have kicked it off a lot earlier.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Greening. And again, thank you for circulating your thoughts via email prior to this and providing the extra detail to your commentary. Look, I think a lot of what you are talking about will ultimately be re-discussed, litigated, debated in the long-term plan conversation. And some of the points you make are clearly something that will be a challenge, just how council manages over the next 10 years to meet all of the obligations that are on us and how that they pay for it. So undoubtedly these discussions are going to continue. I'll just come across to CEO Janine in relation to staff numbers and costs.
Thank you. Through the chair, I would like to say that a view that we're overstaffed really serves a stereotype of councils, which is just not the reality. Not only do our staff have full workloads, but they actually apply an awful lot of goodwill to manage the demands that are on us as a council. The reality is that we can reduce FTE numbers, but the work of those staff needs to either stop or it needs to be done by somebody else, and that's contractors or consultants. And we're seeing the cost of that in our resource consenting. We've got what we are paying for in there through consultants is the equivalent of 4 staff. That would be 10 staff if we had them internally. Just this week, we've had a resignation from a highly skilled staff member who is going out to the consultancy market. We can't even begin to compete for that. Those skills are essential and we're going to have to pay more for them. In terms of stopping the work we do, a large proportion of what we do is not negotiable. Of the remainder, we could reduce staff, but again, you would need to decide what services you want to reduce or stop. Every position we add to the organisation is interrogated by the executive, and when we submitted an increase of 11 staff, those were tangible staff and tangible workloads associated with that. And when we were asked to reduce to 6, we struggled to do that without imposing unrealistic workloads on others. So what we made instead is a commitment that we will find a way to recover that value, and we will do it through other means rather than the actual number of staff. We could reduce some of those with trade-offs, but we couldn't reduce all of them. And so we already rely on savings through carrying vacancies or recruitment lags. We're just going to have to do more of that, and that will not be easy given the current workloads of staff. That's not to say we're not looking at ways that we can work smarter or find efficiencies or savings. We are. Our digital innovation program, we've also, as one example of that, our working with others and trying to use the resources of others so that we can get best bang for our buck. And we are currently undertaking a significant business planning exercise where we're digging down into every budget across the organisation and looking to see if there's any ways that we can pull savings out of that. So this is taking a lot of time and effort, but it is something all of our staff are committed to as well.
Thank you, Janine. Councillor Walker and then Councillor Hill.
Yeah, thank you. Through you. Yeah. So first of all, I want to acknowledge the huge amount of mahi that's gone in for this. I also want to acknowledge my community's voice. And it's a fine line, isn't it, between the level of service versus the level of need, wants and desires. And it would be great if we sat here with a crystal ball and we gazed in it and we worked out perfectly what the inflation rate's going to do. But I don't have that gift and I don't have the ball. But I do have an appetite to make this as affordable as possible for my herding community, our district. And at the moment, I have a huge appetite to try and bring the rate down as low as I can. But I also have a question around, if I may, what is the consequence if we breach our debt cap? That's my first question.
Mike.
Well, there's a financial, through the mayor, there's a financial consequence, obviously. In terms of the process, you need to acknowledge that you're breaching a policy effectively that you have, which is a financial strategy, acknowledge the reasons for doing it, in this case to keep rates more affordable for the 23-24 financial year, and say what you're going to do about it in the future, which would be to review the financial strategy as part of the long-term plan. In fact, I have a set of resolutions here, which I might send to those guys over there if that's where you end up. Mike might want to talk about the financial implications.
Mike. Through Mr. Mayor. There are also some financial implications. So when the local government funding agency is looking at council, it's going to look at the fact that it's made a decision to breach its net debt cap. While that we still remain under the LGFA cap, so our banking covenants effectively, so we've still got some borrowing headroom. The higher our net debt goes, the lower that headroom is, and we face challenges if we were, for example, to have a Cyclone Gabrielle hit this region. And in fact, within your budget, because you are not putting funds away into any of the emergency reserves and you've utilised all the existing funds, that risk sits there for the annual plan year if we have an event. Second external party that looks at us is Standard & Poor's for your credit rating. And so they watch very closely what you do in terms of your income and your debt. And you might ask yourself, why do we get such a good credit rating as a sector? So local government sector, you will not find a credit rating that doesn't start with an A. And that's because of two things. One, we have a really good framework under which local government operates. And the second one is we have the ability to tax. So that's our rates income. So when Standard & Poor's do their review in August this year, they'll be looking at your debt. They'll be looking at your surpluses in terms of some calculations they do and deciding whether or not you move from your current credit rating and outlook to a different one. And so therefore, I would once again recommend caution in breaching the $250 million net debt cap at this time.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you. If you could indulge me for a little bit longer. I'm really pleased, Mike, that you brought up about the emergency weather events because I don't feel comfortable and I won't be voting for the changes to 23 at the minute at 700 because I have a challenge myself around the debt cap being as high. I would like to foreshadow that we put it back to the 500 because that gives me a little bit of wriggle room when said Cyclone Gabrielle was to hit my district.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Hill and then Councillor Butler.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So with the current resolution with the 700,000, does that breach? Would we be breaching?
No, you'd be on it.
No, you would be almost exactly on the limit.
And if there was a significant event during this annual plan year and we're on the limit, what would we do?
We would breach the limit and we would report that. But the reason for breaching wouldn't be a deliberate decision of council as it would be today if you decided to set expenditure at a higher level. It would be a breach that came about because of an adverse weather event. And therefore you would explain it in your annual report.
And in terms of net debts caps generally, ours hasn't been adjusted for inflation. Do some councils do that? Because I guess there'd be a way in which we're losing ground as we go along if we don't. Is that right?
We have increased our net debt cap. It used to be 200 million. It's gone to 250 million. So that was quite a significant increase in the last LTP. Some councils use a more dynamic approach to setting their net debt cap, and that's a consideration that council has been turning its mind to in the workshops leading into the financial strategy that we'll be putting into the next LTP.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you. I have made this comment before. It's for Councillor Greening's discussions about cutting our expenditure, and I don't think we've ever had a discussion about whether or not this council wants to go down the road of austerity. And we did actually, just at the time of COVID, to make a decision that we were not going to have a budget of austerity. And that, as far as I'm aware, is still our position. So the cuts that to our operations that Councillor Greening is suggesting would, in my mind, actually amount to a budget of austerity, and that is something that communities don't support nowadays. So that would be my comment on that. And I was actually going to raise the issue of an emergency with we're in climate change, and we've it's accepted that we're going to have more emergency weather events, and I'm just concerned that if we push it to the wire with our debt cap, that we could find ourselves in a difficult position if we have a big event which is on the cards.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Yeah, it's been a very interesting debate. I think where we arrived at with a combination of utilising the better off funding, for me, strikes the right balance between the concerns in the community and the need to have a sustainable position. I think that long-term plan is absolutely the place to consider a number of the issues that have been raised today. And I know we've already had some initial conversations around dynamic debt caps versus static debt caps, and we've provided a direction that a dynamic debt cap is something we'd like to consider going forward. And that is the right way to consider, to move the debt cap. I'm concerned that you push right up to it, potentially breach it. I just don't think it sends the right message. At the end of the day, it is a self-imposed debt cap, but the community, you go through a process, and some people, Councillor Greening, may have disagreed with the debt cap, but it is a council decision. And the way to change it, I think, is to go through a process, consult the community, suggest why you want to change it for these purposes and these reasons, and do that through a deliberative process, or not, as the case may be. I feel uncomfortable suggesting that we push effectively right to the last dollar through this process. I think the council went out with a fairly courageous rate increase at 9.06. And what I see now is that we've increased and provided funding, extra funding, to a number of the requests that were made, which I support. But then we've kind of just gone and looked for another source of funding to cover it. My personal view is if you want to get down to 8 point something or 7 point something, you need to cut something. You need to make a choice not to do something rather than just go and use a bit of money that you can only use once. And I think Mike's caution is absolutely correct. For those who've been through a 10-year plan before, you want every ability in that process to consider every option. And I just fear that we're going to reduce our ability to do that through that process, through this process. If you look at the average rate increases over the last 3 years, we're in 0, 4.4, 5.5. So your average that's 3.15. If you don't think that's part of the reason we're in the position we are now, and we pulled every lever, the 0 was hard work to get to, because we didn't just go out and borrow extra money or kick stuff. We took the surpluses out of accounts where there were some. We did a whole lot of alterations and changes to get to 0. Now, hindsight, wonderful tool. And, if you went back there now, would you do that? Clearly not. But in the context of the time, I still believe it was the right thing to do, and we achieved it the right way. But that does mean that over the last couple of years, as inflation, and it may well go down, for those with crystal balls who are that accurate, someone should have said that inflation was going to be 7.2% 2 years ago. No one did. No one realised that, Vladimir Putin was going to invade the Ukraine. These are all things outside our control. So you could hope that inflation will be 1.9% in 2025. I think that's very optimistic. So I think if we get back to something in the mid-8s, utilising the existing suggestions, I feel much more comfortable with that. While I recognise that if there's a Cyclone Gabrielle, whether it's 200,000 or 400,000 in our debt cap, frankly, is going to be obliterated, and a whole lot of other things will have to come into it. But I still think if you set a debt cap, you make a decision, you should absolutely stick to it, and provide a bit of room within that for the more minor variation. And for example, the last event we had, which wasn't a disaster, but there is a significant cost to the region of the cleanup. I was up in the Upper Machu Picchu, Upper Motueka River the other day. You know, even a small event now costs us a lot of money. Just the resourcing of the civil defence response. Again, not an emergency, but 5 days of our staff, other people's staff, other agencies and entities being in there, responding, providing. This all comes at a cost. So look, I guess my position is that original resolution with the addition of utilising the better off funding is the right place to land. And the last point I'd like to make is I know that we want to respond and offset all of the other increases our community is facing, but we just can't be that. We can't be the one entity that tries to make up for the cost increases in every other area of people's lives. And insurance is a great example, 20%. So there's an article today, house insurance, 20% increase, driven by what? Response to a lot of emergency events. What is our role and our link into that? We're responsible trying to mitigate a whole lot of that stuff, whether it's through planning, whether it's through physical works, whether it's through flood management, whether it's through the river management plan. So we have a role in trying to reduce the impact on people's insurance premiums by managing a whole lot of those resources. That costs money to do. If we don't do it, insurance premium only gets, so we can't escape the fact that we are integrally involved in trying to manage a whole lot of other costs that fall on people. Insurance is probably the single biggest one. So I guess long story short, I can't support the increase to $700,000. We've got to get through this resolution first, which may or may not pass. So yes, you will get a right of reply. Councillor Shellcrass and then Councillor Kinamont.
I know this might stir up a couple of people, but I'm just going to, the DCs, we've obviously got, I think Richmond's got 9 million. RF's got 6 in Metro Waimea and 9 in Richmond.
Yes, anyway, there's significant amounts of money in both.
Yes. I mean, obviously that's been put aside for community things. Has it ever been used for anything else than that?
So there are very clear criteria over what it can be used for, where and for what purpose, which Mike will no doubt cover. But also bearing in mind, it's not just sitting there as a bit of cash, it is in the net debt figure. So if you utilise $9 million of it, then effectively there is $9 million more that ends up on your net debt figure. So it's not just, it's not as much as it would be nice to think it's just $9 million sitting there. It's not quite as straightforward as that.
Thank you.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Mike?
Just assist councillor. Because the RFCs are collected in relation to growth and development, essentially they need to be spent on mitigating the impacts of growth and development. That's why they're not generally available, say, to offset operating costs, and that's why you'll tend to see them used for capital style projects like enhancing the Kingsland Park area, for example, because we've got a larger population, so therefore more recreational routes. So there has to be a reasonable link between growth and the use of those funds.
Thanks, Mike. Councillor Kinamont.
Thank you. I've been letting you all talk today. I've been sitting back, quite interesting listening to the conversations here with Mark Greene as well. Dwayne, thank you very much for the CPI clarification. I now realise there's a huge difference between what's there. I don't support the increase in the carbon credits, only because I'm also listening to Mike Drummond as well, talking about softly we get there, and why, and I support him in there. Also, Celia, Councillor Butler, sorry, fully support what you're talking about. We've gone through some rough patches to get here, and the austerity budget should be that. I also thank you, the CEO, for your very heartfelt comments about the FTEs. Without the staff, we wouldn't be here today. And I think what I've seen and heard, that they were doing a bloody good job. I don't support the increase to clause 23, and I think Councillor Walker and I are on the same page there. And if we're going to go down to 8.57% increase from 9.06, I think the staff have done a bloody good job in the workshops to get it down to that. So I fully support what they're doing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kinnemont. Before I come to Councillor Marling's right of reply, is there any further comment? Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, through the chair. I want to clarify my position just to make it easier for everybody else. I back the comments made regarding the debt cap by Mr. Drummond, and appreciate the work done by Dwayne with the Better Off funding. I will be supporting the $500,000 option, not the $7 million.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. I will come across to Councillor Marling for his right of reply, and then I'll put the resolution.
Right. So just briefly, I think I wanted to go back to our policy in terms of enterprises, which says 25% of net profits should be used to offset rates. The amount that we were going to use is actually less than that. So we've got a policy in place already. There is an impact in our community. We see it all the time. I was talking to a retailer at the moment who was sitting at home yesterday because he isn't selling any water filters because people are hurting. So that was an interesting conversation. So there are people around here just not spending money because money's so tight. So I want us to squeeze every bit out of the rates increase that we can. And I think the 700 is not an unreasonable amount to use when you take into account how much we've got in carbon credits going forward and the year that we've had. Now, that'll change in the long-term plan, and there are some other things we're going to have to change in relation to that. But there is a community out there that's hurting. We are still going to have a high rates increase, and it's still going to have an effect on some people. And if we have an event, it'll certainly be more than a couple of $100,000. That is for sure. And we will have a good reason for going over the debt cap. I can remember sitting around this table in 2012 doing a long-term plan where the proposed debts cap was $300 million from a previous CEO. So I'm sure Janine would like to know that a previous CEO wanted to increase it, and a previous finance manager as well, Mike. So it was, I think it was 312, and I was the only councillor that voted against it on the day because I couldn't stomach it. So we've been a lot more prudent over the last 11 years than what we were proposing to do then. But that was in the days when everything seemed to get put in the long-term plan. So I think we're still being prudent here, and we are taking account of what's happening in the community.
Thank you. I'll put the resolution. I know Councillor Bryant is also online. Deputy Mayor Bryant, welcome, Stuart. Apologies if you wanted to say anything because right of reply is already gone. But and Councillor Greening, so if you two could, if we do a show of hands, you could just indicate with either your hands up or hands up when I say either aye or nay.
Mayor King, would it be possible to just screen share the resolution? Having come to the party a little late, I'm just unaware of what.
So do you have the original resolution?
The one in the agenda?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. So you're just working on clause 23, are you?
23 is the change to 700,000. The other change is the inclusion of the savings or your savings effectively by utilising the better off funding for some current projects and substituting them those projects with RFCs.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll try by the voices first. So all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Nay. I'll do. So you're voting for the entire resolution with the alteration for 700, correct? Okay. So I'll need to do a show of hands. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that right? And Stuart, I presume you're in favour because you were on the voices. Oh, he's disappeared.
Yeah, no, I'm up here.
Okay. So that's 5. I think. Against? I think it's 7. So the resolution is lost. So we have a foreshadowed resolution, which I presume is the resolution changed back to 500 with better off funding included. Yep. So move Councillor Walker. Is there a seconder? Seconded Councillor Butler. Is there any further question or debate that people would like to have? Councillor Hill.
I think this has been a good process actually this morning, and I'll be supporting the resolution that's about to be put. And I feel like that we have, in the process that we've gone through, canvassed and looked at seriously all of the options. And it's not to say that in my seconding the previous resolution that I felt comfortable about going right up to the debt cap, but I think it's helpful for ratepayers to see that we have looked at a range of options here and the implications of them. And that's what I'm pleased about. I'm pleased about the tone in which we do this here and the collaborative way in which we do it. And I'll be supporting the resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. So Councillor Murray did indicate that he was going to be away for 40 minutes. So yeah, thanks, Mike, for pointing that out. And I was wondering why we didn't have the right numbers when I was adding the 5s and the 7s, but that is why. I did kind of say we might be done before you get back, which I don't think he believed me. But as it turns out, we may well be. So are there any further comments? I'd just like to reiterate the points that Councillor Hill made. Inevitably, this very same conversation is going to take place through the long-term plan. And so should this resolution pass, there is a little bit more wiggle room. I mean, we're talking, actually, it's not huge sums of money either way. A couple of 100,000, you're talking the difference between 8.5 and 8.3 something. But I think it's as much the principle about when you do make these changes, and my preference is to do it through the long-term plan process and have that debate through that process. So again, I'd just like to reiterate, it's been a good conversation and discussion. There are no rights and wrongs ultimately in these decisions. They are exactly that, decisions that we have to come to collectively. And I really appreciate actually the whole process that we've been through for the annual plan. The tenor of the debate and discussion that's been had, whether it's in those workshops or whether it's in the council meetings in relation to the putting out of the draft, being prepared to go out with 9.6, considering submissions. I think we've struck a balance between providing some funding requests to those who requested it, but not all. Equally looking at the options we have for utilising some of that other funding, whether that's forestry, whether that's carbon credits. And I think we're in a good position now post this decision to then really focus on the LTP and some of those bigger questions around debt caps, dynamic or otherwise, rate caps, dynamic or otherwise, over the next 6 to 12 months. So I've got Councillor Greening, Councillor Shellcrass.
Yeah. So again, I don't support even this resolution. The headroom is still too small. It's still proposing additional staff, which we cannot afford and which we can do without, as already acknowledged, through vacancies which are currently being funded. So you can fund these additional new roles through existing vacancy rates. We don't need to fund 6 new staff. The reality is, as today is clearly highlighted, that we are in a position where we are confronted by 2 dramatic, unfortunately, choices. It's been described as austerity. If you're in business, it would be preventing bankruptcy. Or you continue with unaffordable revenue take, which is increasing rates. This ship is nearly floundering in the shallows and onto the rocks, and at some point you have to pull back. Either that or you have unlimitless customers, which is what we have been doing for a number of years, where we just reach further and further into their pockets. This is unsustainable, especially for such a small community as this one. I just struggle to understand how people can make arguments about austerity when you are confronted with the fact you have to now make real cuts. And those are going to be quite dramatic. And it's unfortunate that they weren't eased in earlier because there will be pain. There's either going to be pain in this organisation or pain in the community. And that's the cold, hard reality of where you are. I just cannot understand some of the arguments and reasoning that's been proposed here. It seems to me it's disconnected from the financial reality that this council is in.
Thank you, Councillor Groening. Councillor Shellcrest, and then unless there's other comments, I'll come to Councillor Walker for a right of reply and then put the resolution.
Yeah, just obviously, again, this comment, yeah, for us as obviously, especially new councillors and even all the councillors around here, we've got a, it's justification in our community when we've got people talking to us about the rates, for sure. And one of them is my wife, so I feel like I could probably sleep with both eyes closed possibly now. So, because when I told her 9.6, she was just about stared me in the kitchen. So.
Right, thank you, Councillor Shellcrest. There is no further comments, so Councillor Walker, your right of reply.
Yeah, thank you, through you, Mayor. It's very hard to articulate after Councillor Hill's already summarised most of it, and you, the Mayor. Obviously, getting to where we are isn't going to be satisfactory for a whole heap of people, but as already been stated, it is a balance. It is a very fine line between what we need to do, what we desire to do, and what actually has to happen. So yes, I'd like to see it a lot lower. Acknowledge you, Councillor Greening. However, that's not the reality of today. And I do have hope that the long-term plan actually opens up some more dialogue to get that debt cap looked at, and also where this council is tracking and heading. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. I'll put the resolution. Everyone clear what it is we are voting on? I'll go with voices. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against?
Against.
And you would like your against noted?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, appreciation to everyone who's been involved. That there's been an awful lot of work put in. I realise, there are a number of people, both in the community and no doubt around the table, which would like to see something less than what we've arrived at. But, thanks to everyone's work, effort, and the way that it's been conducted. I will now draw us to the conclusion of the meeting and ask Councillor Hill if she would like to close with karakia.
Thank you, Chair. Karakia tātou, kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa paunamu te moana, aroha atu, aroha mai, Tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Oh.